What is up, guys? Welcome to the Triage Method podcast. This week, I am joined by our nutritionist, Mr. Brian O'hAonghusa. Brian, how are you this week?
Hello, Gary. I'm keeping well, thank you.
Delighted to hear it. And Paddy's not going to be with us this week. Paddy actually had laser eye surgery this week. So the poor fella has been struggling, crying all week long. His eyes are weeping. He's still doing what he can. But we said we would take the lead on the podcast this week and give him a bit of a rest. So
Paddy loves slack and being given slack. So yeah, happy to do it.
Yeah. So for those of you who've been following us, you've been following our social media and stuff like that, you'll be aware that Brian recently came on board as our head of nutrition. So basically what we wanted to do was to take this opportunity on the podcast to introduce Brian, to basically discuss some of the things that we think Brian probably thinks are maybe unique about his approach to nutrition coaching, and then hopefully give some take-home points related to nutrition coaching that are going to be useful for people who've been listening along to the recent podcasts we've been doing on obesity, for example, or people who are just interested in improving their nutrition in the current modern food environment, which is quite challenging for people, you know. So with all that said, Brian, can you tell me a bit about yourself, your little elevator pitch? Take as much time as you want, but how did you get here? What's the history, your education, all that fun stuff?
I'll give you the full story then. I may
Boy.
as well, since this is my origin story episode for
Yes, sir. Go for it.
Any superhero movie enthusiasts. I know you are probably not, Gary, but
No.
you just do it in real life. So I got into the nutrition space because I have a very typical story with this. I was a skinny teenager and I was playing sports, and I wanted to be bigger and stronger for playing basketball. So as soon as I was of age, since I turned 16, I joined the gym, started lifting, had a pretty reasonable start. I had some good guidance from the get-go. So while I still made a lot of mistakes, like everybody does, I'd say I made less mistakes and there was less pissing around than some people might have. So I just became very, very interested in how, lifestyle factors like nutrition, especially, could impact your results and your gains, so to speak. It wasn't even in a sporting contest, but it was just like context. It was more like like you're going to get bigger, stronger, you're going to add muscle tissue. That was how I first got really interested in nutrition. Like I've always had a nice environment, been brought up like around good nutrition habits. Like I have to credit my mom for that. That was where my interest was. And by the time the CAO came around, once I was finishing school, to see what I was going to go to do in college, nutrition was the kind of easy option. It was like, well, that makes the most sense. There wasn't much of a debate about that. I did have physio down as well, but I wasn't going to get that because I put nutrition first. So I got that and then did the 4 years in UCD in Dublin. Then, during that time, I had a good idea that I did want to work with people in a one-to-one context, not in like a clinical setting. So I didn't want to go on and do dietetics like a lot of my classmates would have done. I was pretty sure that I didn't want to work in a hospital setting. I didn't want to go into public health nutrition. I didn't want to, I thought about going into further research and maybe getting a PhD, but definitely knew I wanted to help people in a one-to-one setting. And as such, after I finished college, I did the precision nutrition courses, the level 1 and 2 in that, which specialize in coaching overall with a lot of the emphasis on nutrition. So, a lot of the skills could be applied to any sort of coaching environment, but they're tailored for nutrition because that's the type of service that PN offers. And the level 2 in that was particularly formative in terms of, who I am as a coach and how I operate. So, I can't say enough about that in particular. And then I started coaching clients. When was it? 2017. So I've been in the space about that long, and it's obviously what I do now full time. It's what I do for you guys, and I love it. I love the online coaching gig and working with people in that one-to-one basis.
Savage. And For someone like yourself who actually did your degree in nutrition, did you feel like you were prepared to coach people once you had the degree, or was the other education particularly?
Not, no, not at all. Like I definitely have more nutrition science than I may ever need to use
Mm,
in coaching practice. And I think, we all, I think that's always going to be the case for anyone, any of us who deep dive into nutrition. When you go then to start to apply it to people, like you're not going to use everything. You need to know it, but you know, your clients don't need to know about all the pathways and cycles and things, like they just don't. So obviously that hints at communication being very important in coaching. But no, it left a lot to be desired. The degree program, like, it was very good if you wanted to go do further study. It was very good if you wanted to go into academics. It was very good if you wanted to go into public health, but very much lacking, I felt, in the, okay, how do we actually apply this to people? Like, how do we bridge that gap from the knowledge to the implementation, which is what coaching is essentially. It's guiding people to make those changes, and that's what drew me to do PN. That they have a lot of emphasis on, how you actually coach the behavior change, with these nutritional aspects and lifestyle aspects. So yeah, no, that's exactly why I went in to do that, because while those courses had plenty of nutrition science, and if you'd never done any nutrition science before, you'd get a lot from them. It was all stuff that I'd seen before, and less than what I'd seen before. But the actual coaching skills and the behavioral psychology and that side of things were absolutely fantastic. So when you combine the knowledge and the implementation, then you have the basis for a decent coach, I think.
for sure. Like, you can't just pick up a textbook on metabolism and then expect to be able to coach people on nutrition. It's a lot more complicated than that. But in terms of your own coaching practice, I want to like take a step back and ask about your own diet, because this is something that Patty and I actually discussed a number of months ago. We had a podcast talking about our diet history and how it kind of shaped us.
Yeah.
And we focused on, when we were kids, even for example, and you said that you kind of had a good food environment growing up. Could you give me like a summary of like what that was like for you growing up, if there was any particular influences, and then what the transition was like from a nutrition perspective as you got into the gym? Like, for example, many of us try out things like keto, paleo, vegan,
Yeah.
etc., and just that rough timeline.
Yeah, 100%. That's a good question. That'll be fun to go through. So, growing up, I had, like, when I say I had a very good, positive food environment, my mom cooked all the dinners from scratch,
Mhm.
right? So we were never having takeaways at home, really. Like, it was very, very rare occasion. And that would usually be having them with friends as opposed to having them as a family. So I had like quite a wide variety of, say, dinners. It wasn't very narrow. My mom's a very good cook, and she'd be well capable of making a variety of different meals. And then I would have been having, your typical lunches, which I would say that most people go along with, the sandwiches, and things like that. But and same thing for breakfast. Like, breakfast was cereals. And I was never like told that you can't have such and such a food. Like, I was always having chocolate and stuff as well. But just being around that sort of environment where, everything was cooked fresh, I think definitely had a positive influence. The variety, I suppose, in my diet, like trying different foods, it was always kind of, yeah, let's try this different cuisine. So I was always very open to that. So I don't know if that's innate or if that's nurtured. It's probably a combination. But yeah, things would have changed a lot then when I got into training, as I'm sure you can relate to, because you start reading whatever you read. Start reading T Nation. I was, particularly for me, it was charlespoliquin.com,
Yeah.
because the first trainer that I ever worked with in the gym, like, you would get, as part of your membership for the gym, you'd get a monthly assessment and a program. And the fellow I worked with was like Poliquin certified as a trainer. So, the training content, I think, was pretty good. And then I would consume all the nutrition content I could find which a lot of it is left to be desired, as I know now.
Yeah.
Like, so there's a lot of mad shit that we'll get onto now in a second, but I think we all went through that at some point.
Yeah.
So I would have been very much having like 8 feedings a day kind of thing,
Yeah.
as a late teenager, you know. So because that was, you know, better for your metabolism supposedly, which was obviously it's not. But obviously we're just ignorant at the time. So, and I was eating chicken and broccoli and brown rice
Yeah.
for lunch in school, like when I was, you know, 17, 18. And like I said, yeah, having like 7 to 8 meals a day, but like a meal would be like an apple or, you know, a protein shake or something like that. Definitely hammering the post workout, grape juice and maltodextrin and protein powder. It gets better, just as a disclaimer to anyone listening to this.
Yeah,
It gets
this isn't.
better, but don't write me off as a coach and
Yeah.
being absolutely ignorant.
We all went through this phase, all of us.
Yeah. And so I went through that process, and it was very much about clean eating and, you know, obviously trying to eat a lot, because it was always focused on muscle gain and gaining weight because I was naturally skinny. So eating tremendous amounts of protein. I remember I came across like some old diaries there from when I was like, I think 1920, and some of the stuff in it is just, it's like, I was pissing myself laughing reading it. I did share it on social media at the time, but just what I was doing, and like slamming the 40 grams of BCAAs intra workout, that sort of stuff. And then I got to college. So early on in college, because obviously I was doing nutrition, so I was learning about nutrition going through that. But early on in college, I met some friends, well, now friends, who got me into the paleo diet. And I stuck with that for, you know, a couple of years. I bought into it. You know, so no gluten, or, you know, no grains, no dairy, no pulses. So it was just meat and vegetables and spuds and stuff like that.
Which isn't terrible, to be fair. You know, it's
No,
a
like
good foundation.
I do still have a little bit of a soft spot for it as
Yeah.
a dietary template. I think you could do a lot worse.
For sure.
But just, it's like the reasoning. It's like,
yeah,
it's not that those foods are bad and no one should ever eat them. Like, you know, bread is cool. Like we all like some bread, and you can have it. But like, you know, I was fine having that diet. Not a bother. Then, you know, at the same time, I developed some awareness of flexible dieting and kind of the importance of macronutrients and calories and all that good stuff, which has stuck with me, thankfully. A lot of the other stuff has faded away. So yeah, so I was kind of doing paleo, but calorie appropriate paleo, let's say, for a while. And then it just, you know, got to know better, right? Because basically you can't really say anything more than that. Just, you learn and you realize, oh, okay, it's actually not the case that like dairy is bad for you, or, you know, gluten is bad for you, or anything like that. So that was the evolution. And like, you know, during those periods as well, I was still following some of the poliquinisms. So there was a point I was taking 20 grams of fish oil a day when I was in college. And like that's mental to think of now. I remember I got an order from My Protein before. I was an order for, I think I ended up with like 2,500 fish oils in one delivery, because they used to sell them by like in large amounts. They don't do that anymore. And they made a mistake and they doubled up on the order. So I got twice what I ordered. So I ended up with like 2,500 fish oils in this big sack. And it was like, if you ever came to my house, you get like a goodie bag of like a few shovels of fish oils, because like I need to get rid of these. Yeah, so since then I have learned a lot more about what's actually important in the context of diets and stuff, and how you don't need to exclude entire food groups, and what an actual healthy dietary template looks like, which is, you know, what I do now. Just in case people are wondering, it's like I think you preferred to prefer before as like a high everything diet. So like high protein, high carb, high fiber, high vegetable, fruit, high fat intake, all from, decent sources without any exclusions, so that flexible approach, but with the emphasis on quality whole foods, if you want to call them that.
Yeah, so you're kind of agnostic when it comes to diet now. Like you don't call it anything particular. It's just, yeah, what you like, what's considered to be healthful, etc. So Brian isn't coming on board as like our low carb or vegan coach. So sorry if anyone is disappointed.
Yeah, if I'm gonna be like the guy, I'm gonna be the vegetable guy probably.
Yeah.
That's one that I tend not to yield on. I think most of my successful clients do eat more than average amounts of vegetables, unless they're keto maybe. But even then, you're supposed to be still eating some vegetables in that case.
Yeah, it's hard to make the case that eating a heap of veg is a bad thing,
Yeah.
So as you kind of like reflect on that journey, what do you feel was the biggest barrier for you along the way? Like, did you have any significant barriers with nutrition that you had to overcome? Like, did you ever have a period of binge restrict like some people go through, or anything like that?
No, thankfully I didn't. But I suppose the barrier is going to be ignorance, and like ignorance of how energy balance works and how food quality works. So like I would definitely have an easier time gaining weight now
Yeah.
with what I know than I did when I was 19, 20, just because I was trying to bulk on all, quote unquote, clean foods. So I would end up like tremendously full and eating too much protein as well, probably like unnecessary amounts of protein, and amino acids, like I already said. So, I mean, if you call that a barrier, it's probably just ignorance of what's actually important. What are the actual boxes you need to tick to get results, instead of, oh yeah, it's clean eating, and then that's that. Eat loads of protein and eat clean foods, and that's how you get to where you want to be. Which I suppose, like, we're probably going to talk about that later, but that's one of the probably key things that I have to impart to my clients, depending on what their own background and history is like, because they may be stuck in that sort of ideology, where it's like clean eating is important, if I want to get results, or eating no carbs is important if I want to get results. So yeah, it's just not having the knowledge of what was actually important and what you need to consider when you're trying to set up a successful, healthy dietary approach, if you want to call that a barrier. But I had no issues really, thankfully, except I neglected myself of bread and stuff for a couple of years. So
yeah,
if you want to call that self-harm, I don't know.
Yeah, but I think what's encouraging for people from that story, because it's very similar to like myself and Paddy and almost everyone I know who's come out the other end as someone who has a reasonable approach to nutrition. Like, everyone's gone through that phase of trying different things, some things more ridiculous than others, particularly when you're young and you're impressionable and you assume that there's going to be a perfect way. I think I remember Danny Lennon even saying on the podcast that he once did the all potato diet. I didn't even know that was a thing, like just potatoes every meal, and obviously lost loads of weight because potatoes are ridiculously filling. You'd be so full.
Yeah.
So like, everyone that I know who's come out with like a reasonable, moderate stance on nutrition, who's, evidence-based and all those sorts of things, everyone's been through that phase of doing silly things. So if you are someone in that position who's maybe just getting into nutrition and you're overwhelmed and you're confused and you don't know what to do, I think it's useful to know that everyone's been through that phase. We've all done silly things. Like, I've had my phase of being keto for a while, and to be honest, I kind of did it out of curiosity, but also believed in the things like you said. When paleo was the big thing, I thought that bread was bad and that I should be avoiding dairy. And obviously when I first got into the gym, like you say, very frequent feedings, all clean foods, assuming, that there were specific foods that were going to lead to fat gain and others that wouldn't, etc. So we've all been there, and I think
Mm.
that's good for people to know.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of information available now is obviously much better. And,
For
that's
sure.
something that we do, so we're trying to save people from, having to go through as much of that. But I think people are in a better position at a younger age these days than say when we were, in our late teens, early 20s.
100%. Like, I think the average stance, if you were to go on social media and follow like a good few personal trainers that have a decent following in Ireland, for example, the average stance on nutrition that you're going to get is probably a fairly reasonable one. Like, calories matter, you should
Mm,
eat more protein. There's no real bad foods. You can be flexible with your approach. And sure, you mightn't get the most perfect summary of all the evidence from these people, but you're getting a decent starting point. Whereas 10 years ago, like, I don't think you would have got that as the average standard among personal trainers with nutrition. So you would have been more so along the lines of the bodybuilding diets, really,
yeah.
clean eating, paleo, depending on the person's persuasion.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think people are in a good position. And if you're listening to the Triage Method podcast, I mean, you're on the ball. So stay tuned. And with that said, over the last few podcasts, we've been discussing obesity. And one of the things that I think comes up time and time again as an issue when we look at obesity prevalence increasing across many, many populations, listen to the previous podcast if you haven't, is the food environment. That's the really, really large barrier for so many people, because it's the very simple way of breaking it down is that it's just very easy to overconsume calories. Like, it's
Yeah.
way easier to do that than to not do that. That's the most simple breakdown, because
Mm,
you've basically got big, large food corporations that are doing their best to design foods that are going to lead you to overconsume and to come back and keep consuming those. And then as a result, you end up with your neurobiology, your reward system saying, yeah, we actually want more of that. And then we want less of the cleaner meals, let's say, because they don't taste as good. They're not as palatable. And when you factor in economic concerns, as we discussed in the previous podcasts,
mm,
you end up in a position where, it's also quite cheap to eat like that as well, and it's accessible anywhere I go, and it's quick, it's convenient. So all of those things lead to an obesogenic environment.
yeah.
So with that said, what are some of the things that you think people can actually take ownership of in their own lives to try to reduce their tendency to succumb to that food environment?
Yeah. So, like, the environment is so important. And before I go into that,
Yeah.
I have another thought that I think people operate on a very black and white mindset. So, to give you an example, if you have someone who is on the road a lot, say I have clients who are ambulance workers,
Mhm.
they're on the road a lot, they're working shifts, their only option may be a 24-hour garage,
Yeah.
to go get something to eat. And I think a lot of people walk into, say, a garage like that with the preconceived notion that this is suboptimal. I can't make this work as well as if I prepared something myself at home, brought it with me, or if I wasn't working shift. Um, and that is not true. So if you can, free yourself from that sort of all or nothing thinking by telling yourself, ah, crap, I have to go get a meal from the garage. And you're just writing it off, without even thinking about it. Then you're going to go in and you're just going to choose whatever seems best to you at the time, because it's suboptimal. So it doesn't matter if I get, sausage rolls, and like soda and some chocolate and crisps or whatever it is. But the reality is, and this is what I'll coach people on in these kind of cases, that, like, let's have maybe some decisions that you go in with ahead of time. So it's like, okay, if the garage has, some, maybe some yogurt or, milk or something like that, then, okay, well, that's a reasonable protein source. You could get that. Maybe they have, breaded chicken, and maybe that's not like the best thing in the world, but is it better than, say, sausage rolls or getting sausages? You know, they're going to be much higher in fat, much lower in protein, and much less suitable to what most people's health and nutrition fitness goals are going to be. You know, a lot of these places will sell fruit. There's a lot of options. Even if you find yourself in what you might classify as a suboptimal environment, right? And like you said, look, it's if you are not overweight in the environment that we live in these days, like you're fighting against your own genetics and you're fighting against everything else that's going on, like the food corporations and things. So yeah, you are the outlier, so to speak, which is why this is so difficult. But if you can go in without that attitude of saying like, this particular environment sucks, it's not my home environment, and actually open your mind up a little bit and say, okay, what actually could I do here? And have a plan in mind before you go into these places. And the same goes for, like, you know, in that same example, maybe you have to get a takeaway or something. But there are better and worse options along that spectrum as well, you know, that are going to be suitable for your goals. So like a Thai food takeaway that's not battered and, you know, has a side of veg and, you know, some rice or something, maybe better than getting pizza, for example. But it's not just to be thrown out the window as all being suboptimal and a poor choice. So that's the kind of food environment in those different contexts. And then like at home is the one you ideally should have the most control over. It's going to be hugely important. That's one of the big tenets of having a successful dietary approach, or any sort of approach. It doesn't have to be for diet, but your environment has to be supportive of what you're actually trying to achieve. You know, so you need structure, and then you look at the environment and shaping that for whatever your goals are. So in like a nutrition context, it's very simple stuff. It's like, you know, when you open a press or you open the fridge, like how much, you know, chocolate and sweets and stuff are actually looking at you in your line of vision when you do that. The more that there are there, the more likely you're going to go and just grab something like that. And I've experienced that myself. When I was in New Zealand there at the end of 2019, you know, I was staying with some friends, and one of the vegetable drawers in the fridge was dedicated to chocolate. So even me, who is good at nutrition and like health habits, every time I open that fridge up, and as well, they're big 250 gram bars, so they weren't even individually portioned. So in that case, you're just breaking off rows at a time. It's too easy to do whenever you feel kind of snacky like that. You know, maybe you're going to the fridge to get ingredients to prepare a meal, so you're already a little bit hungry, but then you open up the fridge and you're like, oh yeah, I'll just have some of that chocolate. Actually, that'll take the edge off a little bit, but you could consume quite a lot. So, you know, with that in mind, and what I actually advised them to do was like, okay, guys, break off the portions that you're going to have on a daily basis, leave them in the fridge, leave the rest of the bar elsewhere, so you can't just keep picking at it. You know, because they were interested in this stuff as well. So it's that sort of thing. And there's a saying that I think James Clear says this. So, you know, the author of Atomic Habits. You know, he says that the people who apparently have the best willpower, and we won't go into like discussion about willpower, whether it exists or not, but the people who apparently have the best willpower have to use it less, right? Because they have their environment set up in such a way that they don't need to. So it's a case of making the things that you want to do as easy as possible to engage in. So having the food in the fridge, having the food in the press after you go to the shop so that you can make the meals. Better yet would be to do some meal prep. So when you have to make a choice between, you know, ordering in or choosing meal that you've prepared yourself, if the meal that you prepared yourself is already there, then that is the easy choice. You can go for that. You stay on the path. If it's not there, then you're left with a harder decision, let's say, to make, because it's kind of 50-50, right? So you don't want a 50-50 versus the better and worse choices that you're going to make. You want to make it as easy as possible to make the better choices, and as difficult as possible to make the poorer choices. So keeping snack foods, treats, and things out of sight does keep them out of mind. So, you know, put them in an opaque container, put that in the back of a top press, somewhere where you don't look generally. And if you can, put it somewhere where you don't generally look for food. And then therefore you won't come across it. You won't be thinking about it as much. You one of the kind of classic examples of this, like having a fruit bowl on the counter. If you have a fruit bowl on the counter, you will eat more fruit, right? It's very simple because it's in your line of vision. It's like, oh yeah, actually, I see there's apples there. I'll have one of those. And if you compare that to, say, having a treat bowl on the counter, then that's what you're going to end up having. And like I say this all the time, if you go to a party, not that you're doing that these days, but if you go to a party and you find yourself sat in front of the snack table, you, Gary, or I, or Paddy, or anyone will naturally eat more snacks and stuff if we're parked there in front of it for 2 hours, because it's directly in our environment. It's triggering, habits and behaviors. Whereas if you found yourself standing over in the corner of the room away from the snack table, then you will probably eat a lot less of those snacks, purely because it's an environmental thing. So looking at your environment, seeing how you can control it to support the behaviors you want to engage in, and to not support the behaviors you don't want to engage in. And that applies to any habits, be it around food or not.
100%. Like you're effectively trying to, just as you say, like reduce the friction between you and making a healthful choice, and increase that friction between you and making the less healthful choice. And there's many examples of things on both sides of the aisle there. Like some of the things that I do personally, and you might share some of your own after, is, for example, in Aldi, they sell like these prepackaged lentils and different beans and grains and different types of just prepared things, similar to the packets of Uncle Ben's rice that you get. They're super high in fiber. They give you a decent bolus of protein. They're tasty, and a minute or two in the microwave and they're done. Like, I know that there's significant friction between me like preparing a meal such as like a lentil dish. Like, when am I going to have the time to create a lentil dish, and am I likely to do that? Probably not. Whereas if I have the lentils pre-prepared in a little package that I just pop in the microwave, you're basically doing what is generally pushing you towards less healthful choices in terms of convenience, easy access, and you're basically applying it to something more healthful. So that's something that I do that makes that choice much easier and allows me to increase my fiber without necessitating more time with meal prepping. Other things that I would do sometimes would be, for example, those packets of potatoes that you put in the microwave and you just pop them in the microwave. You don't have to think of them, because again, boiling your potatoes can sometimes, take quite a bit of time. Or if I am preparing potatoes, I might just pop them in the microwave with some water and just prepare them like that. So I'm always looking for things like that, little hacks to make my diet easier to adhere to, because often I'm stuck for time and I'm busy, and I know that if I can reduce that friction, that I can make more healthful choices. But there's plenty of examples. Do you have any of your own that you use frequently?
Yeah, like that. Yeah, that's a really good example with the lentils, because you don't want to sit there and soak them and then cook them up. And I do want to say to people that there's no extra points, and it's not a badge of honor to be preparing everything from scratch.
Yeah.
Like, no one cares if you've made your own pasta by hand. Like, there's like a nostalgic bias, or like the kind of natural fallacy kind of plays into this. But, if there are those convenient options, because, convenience is great. Like, it makes your life a lot easier, as you said, reduces the friction between you and engaging in those behaviors. And there are nice examples like that, of like the lentils, and they do chickpeas as well, in the same sort of idea. So I would be looking to maximize convenience where possible, and there's nothing bad about wanting your food to be convenient and not spend 6 hours cooking every day. Like, nobody's got time for that. So like things that I do in that context, slow cooking is definitely one. You'll know I'm a massive proponent of using a slow cooker. I think it's the best piece of meal prep equipment that you can get, because at its like most convenient, you can just throw your meat and vegetables into it and turn it on, or like with some water and then or some sort of liquid, turn it on and then leave it, right? And then 6-8 hours later, the food is ready, right? And that, like, it's taking you all of 5 minutes to do that. Now, a lot of recipes for slow cooking will ask you to, say, brown off the meat first, then put it into the slow cooker. You can do that. It doesn't take much longer. But again, if we're talking about reducing friction, it's very, very easy to just throw everything in, get it started with some seasoning, and you're good to go. And if you get a big slow cooker, then you can prepare potentially a few days worth of meals within that. And yeah, just looking at like convenient options, like preparing vegetables is a big one for people. But like, okay, so frozen veg is usually cooked pretty quickly. But even like, I was having this conversation with someone earlier who was being lazy with his vegetable preparation. So, I called him out on it, and I said, look, like, realistically, man, you can steam broccoli in the microwave and it'll take you about 2 minutes, right? And it's not like you have to do anything for those 2 minutes. Like, you can leverage that time to your heart's content with whatever else you want to do. Literally you have to chop it up, put it in a bowl, put a bit of water in, cover it, and then microwave for 2 minutes, and you have steamed broccoli. All right, so that is not a large ask. So that's one that I would utilize an awful lot. Things like turkey burgers are pretty handy. I definitely went through a phase of being sick of turkey burgers from overdoing it and just being bombarded. Like, the food environment just felt like it was just turkey burgers for a little while there. But I mean, they are easy, they are handy. Like, if you have a George Foreman, I don't, but if you have a grill, you can grill them pretty quick in the oven under the grill. Yeah, you'll do them very, very quickly. And that's really easy, good protein source to have. It doesn't take any preparation except getting it from the packet onto the grill and then turning it maybe once. Like, I do the same thing as you with the lentils. Those pouches are definitely handy. Same thing with the rice. You get rice noodles that just go into a pan for a couple of minutes and they're ready. Pre-cooked prawns are a very good source of protein because they're already ready to eat. You just have to heat them up essentially. You can get pre-chopped vegetables, to help you out there. And one of the rules for like successful, I call it meal prep, but every time you're in the kitchen cooking something, ideally you want to do a little bit more than just for that meal. So, if you're chopping veg to have with a meal right now, chop a little bit more for a future meal, right? And you'll save yourself a bit of time in that context because you're already set up, you're already doing the chopping anyway. There's a saying that it takes just as long to roast 2 chickens as it does to roast 1 chicken, right? Because if the oven's on and you got 1 chicken in there, you may as well put something else in and make use of it while you're in the kitchen. Tinned fish are fantastic. Like, I think if you're going to go for what's convenient, nutritious, and cheap, like, you can't really do better than tinned fish. So I feel sorry for people who don't, like, just can't eat it. I know you don't really eat tinned fish or
I'm
oily
not a big
fish.
fish guy, to be honest.
Yeah. So I sympathize with you, Gary, because you're missing out there, brother. But yeah, those are some examples of how you can just make things easy for yourself. And anybody in their own situation will be able to think, oh yeah, maybe I could do this. Yogurts, like high protein dairy products are like an absolute godsend, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever had a successful diet. Well, no, not that. My most successful diet phases have been, using a lot of high protein yogurt and stuff.
Always.
Because they take no preparation. Fruit generally takes no preparation. So, if you're not as big a veg eater, if you can at least eat a lot of fruit, like, you're probably doing pretty well. So yeah, those are some ideas, I think.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that I always come back to with people time and time again is the fruit and veg, really, because I think people often have a barrier to eating frozen veg and frozen fruit because they think, oh, it's less nutrition or less nutritious. Whereas, firstly, it's, if anything, it's equally or sometimes more nutritious depending on the nutrient you're looking at. And to be honest, with all cooking methods, there's always a trade-off in some nutrients, depending on whether you're boiling or steaming or roasting or frying, etc. There's always different trade-offs. So I don't like people to get overly caught up in that stuff because it's just too messy. It's just not worth the hassle. And ultimately, the main thing that people need to actually be focusing on is trying to eat more fruit and veg. And the
Yeah.
easiest way to do that is to get some frozen veg, because it's cheaper, it keeps better, and it's easy to prepare as well, you know. And so I'm a big
Mm.
fan of that personally. And it's pretty easy to rack up quite a few servings. You know, I'm not sure what you consider a standard serving to be, but I kind of say 80 grams or 80 to 100 grams is
Yeah.
kind of average serving size. But I mean, if you have like frozen blueberries, for example, and you have a high protein yogurt, if you pop 200 grams of those blueberries into the microwave for 60 seconds or whatever, so they defrost a little bit, then you add in your yogurt, you got a super high protein meal that's super nutritious, loads of them beautiful polyphenols, lovely blueberry taste,
Mm.
and it's really low in calories and really filling. So, you know, make your life easier rather than harder. I think that sometimes we get a bit of that kind of residual bodybuilding mindset where, you know, you have to suffer through your diet. So, you know,
Yeah.
that you have to make it as challenging as possible. Whereas very often there's these simple things that can make such a difference to the overall
Yeah.
healthfulness of your diet, you know?
Yeah. And that kind of comes back to what we spoke about in the beginning, is like what is actually required of you to have a successful diet, or a healthy diet. And it's not that you eat bland foods, and it's not that you spend ages preparing your foods. And that can be quite a big barrier to people, because some people do believe that even still, that like, you know, I have to prepare everything from scratch, and I can't use like sauces and seasonings and stuff, because for whatever reason they believe, you know, about the food, when it's just not the case. So yeah, absolutely make life easier for yourself in that context. I know we like, you know, physical challenges and things like that to build resilience, but you don't have to do it with your nutrition.
It's
It's
hard enough already. You know?
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, that yogurt and blueberries or any frozen berries, like that's like I eat so much of that. Like it's so easy, it's tasty, it's so nutritious, so filling. Like yeah, the frozen fruit is my favorite one to talk about, like in terms of food volume, because you know the 4 berry mix out of Aldi
Yeah.
is about, I think it's 33 calories per 100 grams. Um, you know, so if you want to have 500 grams, that's like 150 odd calories. Um, Whereas you look at how much chocolate will give you, about 150 calories, it's like, you know, 20 grams or so. So you're talking like 20 grams versus 500 grams of food, which is going to be smarter for dieting if that's what you're doing, or just staying full. Um, you know, it's pretty obvious answer. And you know, food volume is important, like whatever about flexible dieting, but like I suppose not trying to be too flexible is also
Yes.
making life easier for yourself. I think you probably agree, but we can see it sometimes where people try and do too much, like fitting in like these macro friendly treats and stuff, whereas you would be better off just having like that heaping bowl of yogurt and berries. Makes life easier. You're going to get more nutrients from it, and you're going to be more full. So
Yeah, I think that is really important, because there is, you know, a bit of a pendulum swing there that people go through, and I went through this myself as well. You know, where I initially would have been the kind of standard bodybuilding diet, so focused on, you know, your clean foods. So it was, you know, chicken, brown rice, potatoes, sweet potatoes, broccoli, etc. It was fairly restricted, you know, and then as I started to learn more about flexible dieting, and to be fair, that was actually when I was quite young. So I was lucky enough in that sense, maybe a year or two into training or whatever, a year into training maybe. And I started to learn about flexible dieting and the if it fits your macros, IFYM. And for people who are unaware of that, basically what started to happen was that people would transition away from this kind of clean eating approach, and then people would start to track their calories and macros, which is, you know, generally it's sound practice for sure. But then there was a trend for a while of like flex bowls and things like that, and YouTube IFYM days of eating became really popular. And basically it was almost like a social trend where people tried to fit as much junk as they could into their required calories or macros for the day. So it was almost like a badge of honor, you know, that you were able to fit in this junk. And I did some of that for a while. But what I found was that, you know, you kind of, have to keep some remnants of that clean eating approach as you go along. And obviously, that's something we always talk about in the podcast, that food quality still matters. But even just looking at the nutrition specific stuff aside, like forget about nutrients or anything like that, one of the things that I found and that many other people find too is that as you begin to expose yourself to all these really tasty foods all the time, in a position such as when you're in a calorie deficit, you're dieting, you're already in a position where you're more sensitive to those cues and you're going to have a tendency to overeat. Your palate becomes retrained, and we know that happens already with taste buds and stuff like that, but
Mm.
your palate becomes retrained, and obviously the nervous system element of that too, but you no longer really desire those cleaner foods. You know, a meal of chicken, broccoli and rice, or a standard dinner doesn't taste as good when you've just fit, you know, 600 calories of low calorie ice cream in, or you've just had all of your carbs from cereal or whatever.
Mm.
So you're left in a position where you've got a diet that's giving you low satiety, so it's not keeping you full. It's leaving you craving more of those foods along with that, and you're not full. And then you're also in a position where you're in a calorie deficit and you're not full anyway, and you're craving more food in general,
Mm.
and you don't want the foods that are going to keep you full. So it's kind of a recipe for disaster, you know?
Mm. Yeah, it's no, it's not a good place to put yourself in. And it just comes back to making life easier. So as you said, there's a pendulum swing, because you know I can kind of understand that when people are liberated from the need to eat clean,
Yeah.
it's kind of like a panacea, but the pendulum needs to swim back to more of that middle ground, where it's going to be naturally where, yeah, like, you know, that 80-20 or the 90-10 is probably a good area to be in. You know, especially if you're dieting in a calorie deficit or anything like that. Like, if you're taking in less calories, you're not getting as much nutrients anyway. So you kind of have to maximize each calorie per nutrient. And by doing that, all the things you just described will happen. You'll be fuller. You know, you won't be, yeah, like hypersensitive to super sweet
Mhm.
foods or super palatable foods. And you'll enjoy the I don't want to say mundane, because like I really enjoy the food that I eat
Yeah.
and I wouldn't have it any other way. But yeah, like, you know, if you're going to keep bombarding yourself with that hyper palatable stuff, that's what you're going to want.
Mhm.
You know, as opposed to like the inherent sweetness of strawberries or something like that.
Yes, sir. And to finish us off, what I wanted to ask was, if we think about a client, let's say, that's coming to work with you, and there's someone who's, you know, tried many diets in the past and they've never really had great kind of fat loss success for whatever reason, what do you find to be the biggest barriers that those types of people struggle with, or that you find yourself addressing early on? It could be one barrier, it could be multiple. Just
Mm.
interested to hear what you think.
Yeah, excuse me. A few things come to mind. So it's all going to come back to the question, like, why haven't those approaches worked for you in the past? You know, what's been wrong with them, so to speak, and where are the gaps in terms of like what you and I would describe as a well put together diet template? Like, what's lacking in that context? And often people will say go into too big of a calorie deficit and combine that because they want super fast results, or that's just the plan they've been put on by someone who doesn't know any better, and it's just giving out 1,200 calorie plans and saying to people go ahead without any consideration of what their baseline of habits are. So like, you know, I can think of some clients in recent memory that have said to me like, you know, yeah, I've tried 1,600 calories. Um, I know that's what I need to lose weight, but I can't stick to it. Um, and she just figured it was an issue with calorie intake. We actually looked at it, and it was like, okay, her protein intake was very low. Her plant intake was very low. So those baseline habits, and like, you know, what's going to be a main barrier to people adhering is going to be hunger. Is a massive one. Like, it's just as
Yeah.
simple as that. Like, if you're hungry all the time, you're not going to be able to adhere. So what can you do to address that? You make sure you eat enough protein at every meal, more or less, and you ideally start driving up your fruit and vegetable intake, and therefore and thereby fiber, so you are much more full. So you're not experiencing that hunger. So we want you like as full as possible on those kind of dieting calories, right? Which is not where a lot of people are coming from. They maybe just pick up that's like, okay, I just have to eat this many calories and then I'll be good. And they just try and fit their normal dietary template into that, which is going to be low satiety, and hence why they're in the position they are, where they have this desire to lose weight, because all the things that you've been talking about in the previous podcasts, like the obesogenic environment, until you address what your actual habitual structure is, it's going to be a lot more difficult to actually get the results you want. So there's that, and then there's trying to go too quickly. So if you haven't, say your maintenance is 2,000 calories and you haven't had any success at going down to 1,200 calories, while it might generate really rapid results, what's the point if it's not going to actually last, right? If you can't adhere to it, and then you essentially tell yourself that you failed your diet again, it's not a nice place to be in, like, mentally. And what often comes with this as well are expectations of what should happen, in terms of when you start making these changes. So addressing expectations is a huge part of the job, because people often have just arbitrary ideas of what good progress is. So it's like, a kilo a week of weight loss is good progress. It's just, it's kind of, and I'll ask people, okay, where does that actual number come from? And it's like, okay, I just picked it out of the air because it sounded nice, or, I've done a 6-week transformation before, and what that looked like in practice was, super low calorie diet, a lot of exercise. Yeah, they stick to it. After the 6 weeks were up, no, but they saw the rapid results and attribute that to them being like the standard, even though they don't maintain the results whatsoever. So actually, like, letting people understand what expectations they should have about progress, so that they then don't think, oh, I'm doing shit here, or there's something wrong with this approach, because they're losing, 0.5% of their body weight per week, like, which is very much in the range that we would like to see. And, like, for people who have run, say, longer term successful diets in the past, they're better candidates for a more aggressive approach. But that's because, their habits are already in place. Like, they're ingrained. It's not a question of whether they have to eat more protein or more vegetables, because they're already doing it. And then you're looking at things like setting the bar too high when it comes to whatever new behaviors you're trying to implement. I find this one really interesting generally because people just trip themselves up, really, because they say, okay, I don't eat any vegetables now, but in a week's time, I have to be eating 10 servings a day. And that's what I have to do. So again, that comes back to not understanding what's actually required for success. They've just decided, okay, I have to eat more vegetables. Let's do 10 servings a day. 2 days in, they're nowhere close to meeting that. They say, well, shit, I'm not doing so well here. I'm failing day in, day out. There's only so much of that someone can take, even though it's by their own design and completely unnecessary. Like, you don't have to go from 0 to 10 servings a day to have success. So trying to do too much too soon is a big limiting factor in my experience. And again, like we already talked about, it's like, what's actually necessary? Because, like, people will come in and say, okay, yeah, I had good results on like keto or low carb before, so I want to do that again. And it's like, all right, well, how did that work for you last time?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, it was good, but 4 weeks in, I couldn't do it anymore. I lost like a lot of weight, but I couldn't do it, so I was reverted back. And I was like, well, how about we try another approach? Because the absence of carbohydrates in your diet is not a requirement for success. Okay, so it's just there can be knowledge gaps as well, like in that sense. And it's it's not people's fault, because there's so much fucking bullshit pushed onto them, being like, keto works because your body turns into a fat burning machine. That sort of shit is rampant, unfortunately. And like, while there has been a shift in terms of better information out there, and Triage is here putting out good content, and lots of other people, but people are still unaware as to like why things actually work, so not understanding the principles of the methods. Those would be a lot of the main ones, I think.
Yeah, I think you touched on a number of really important points there. And I think I would just finally just reiterate that point that like education is so powerful in all of those, because the thing is, like, sometimes, we can say, oh, people are doing too much too soon, they're over restricting, they're taking on too much, etc. But if someone expects that that is what is required, then that's a totally rational thing to do. It's a reasonable thing to do. So I think that's an
Yes.
important thing for listeners, is that we're not saying that you're dumb for taking on too much too soon or for trying silly diets or whatever, because if you've been told that's what's required, then totally respect that will be your next decision. So, education is really important. And I think that that is something that we try to impart on our clients, is that education, because it is just, you can't understate the importance. Because one of the things that I say to every client that signs up is that, like, coaching is about taking you to a point where you're more or less independent. You don't have to be, that's your choice, but that you can be independent with managing your nutrition or your training or whatever your goal is. And the only way you can get there is by being educated along the way. And that's one of the reasons that, if you do sign up with myself or Brian or Paddy or anyone who's worked with us previously, like, you're not just going to get a meal plan on day one and we'll say, yeah, there you go, stick to that, we'll review in 6 weeks. Like, it's just not the path to success. And I think that, just if you are someone who's trying to make progress and get your nutrition in order, just try to avoid those things. Because while a meal plan, that you just got off bodybuilding.com or whatever, like, yeah, I can get your results in the short term, but it's not creating that independence that you actually want longer term. I'm sure you'd agree.
Yeah. And this is something I ask people often, is like, how long is too long for you to get to where you want to be? And people don't often consider that. Like, the default is just, I want to get there as soon as possible. So like, let's do this in 6 weeks, or 8 weeks, or whatever it is. But if they're not ready, let's say to get the results that quickly, like, you can ask them the question, is like, oh, well, how long would be too long? Or like, at what point would it be, okay, Gary, this is going to take 6 months? Like, are you going to say, fuck that, man? No, I'm not in for that. Because if you want to have a long lasting change, it can take some time. But quite often people will say, yeah, okay, I'm willing to put the work in. It may take some time, but it will be worth it, pretty much, without exception.
Yes, sir. And I think that finishes us off. Anything you'd like to add before we finish up?
I don't think so. Just hooray for being on the team.
Hooray. Absolutely. And we are delighted to have you. So with that said, guys, you know where we are. We are taking on clients at the moment. Brian is taking clients on at the moment. So if you are looking for someone to, work with on a nutrition only basis, that's exactly why we brought Brian on board. And the one thing I didn't ask you, could you give me some insight into like the spectrum of your clients, the people you normally work with?
Yeah, sure. It's quite wide
Yeah.
reaching in terms of who I work with. So it ranges from, like, okay, so I've gotten a bit of a niche now with people who have poor relationships with food anxiety, food fear, those being barriers for them having success or health, or just not being consumed by thinking about food all the time and whether they're doing the right thing. People may be struggling with binge eating or other disordered eating patterns. I'm doing a lot of work with people on that, like the last couple of years, with a lot of success, I'm glad to say. So there's that, but then absolutely I have, your typical fat loss clients, people looking to improve sports performance, athletic performance, body composition, muscle gain. I work with people to manage like digestive issues like IBS, absolutely. Hormonal things like PCOS in females. So it's quite wide ranging, and it's unlikely that I can't help you, whatever your issue is. So I'd be delighted to work with you, chances are.
You love to hear it. So with that broad range of clients, Brian's going to be filling up quick, guys. So if you're interested and you find yourself in any one of those boxes or other boxes, do get in touch and we'll see if we can help you out. And obviously, myself and Patty are also taking on clients. So if you're someone with training and nutrition goals, broader goals, then that's who you'll be working with. And if you're someone with injury, pain, rehab, that's the kind of side of things you're on, you'll be working with myself. So I think overall, Triage, we've got you covered. You know, we'll have to broaden psychology. I think will have to be the next thing we delve into. But for now, we are taking on clients. If you're interested, you can find the information in the description box below. Other than that, guys, you know where to find us. We send out our weekly newsletter. You can subscribe to that below. You can follow us on all our social media platforms at Triage Method. You can also follow me at Skinny Gaz, Brian at Brian O'hAonghusa. I'll link that in the description because it's a challenge for people, to be fair, and me. And at The Real Paddy Farrell if you're looking for Paddy on the socials as well. So other than that, guys, as if you're a coach, you know that you can join the Coach's Corner, where you can find the educational content, including information on nutrition. And other than that, I don't think we have anything else to add, other than if you do listen to the podcast and you like the podcast, we'd appreciate if you share it on your Instagram story or wherever you happen to share things. You can also leave a review depending on the platform on which you view or listen to the podcast. And yeah, feedback is always welcome. And other than that, I guess we'll see you, and Paddy will be back again next week. Thank you very much, Brian, for joining us.
Awesome. I will talk to you soon.
Legit.